Welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast with Stuart Fensterheim, LCSW, your source for the latest tips and practical down-to-earth advice on creating emotionally connected, thriving relationships. Now, here's Stuart.
Hi there, and welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast. Today is a great day here in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's not as hot as it once was, and we had some rain yesterday. So it's a great day here, and the temperature is lower than it normally is. The humidity is low, and we're just having a blast here at the Couples Expert. Today we're going to talk about conflict in couples, and I brought on the show Ann Goshen. Ann is a friend of mine who I've known for a little bit, met her on Facebook, and she and I are both podcasters. She has a podcast of her own, and she'll probably talk a little bit about that. But more importantly, what we're going to be talking about is my mission of helping couples really feel close and secure with one another, and really understanding that they have within them a power for their partner to really have a relationship that isn't just good, but exceptional, and that we can create, helping one another, a special relationship in which we know we're not alone in this world, and that there's another human being that cares about us so much that they're willing to sacrifice and do whatever it takes to really have us feel loved, be happy, and enjoy the world and our life with them. What we're going to do is talk about the fact that conflict tends to trigger people. And I don't know if some of you have seen my recent 3 Minutes with Stuart video that I have on YouTube. And if not, I want you to check it out there at the Couples Expert YouTube channel. And what I talked about is this feeling of primal panic. And that as couples, what happens is we get so upset with one another that we go into this place that is like the Twilight Zone, if some of you remember the Twilight Zone television show, where we do and say things that are just so off the beaten path. And we're going to be talking to Ann a lot about that. But let me tell you a little bit about Ann. Ann is a wonderful, caring human being who I know and I respect so much because her commitment to the couples that she works with is beyond reproach. She gives of herself. She gives today of her time with us here at the Couples Expert to really help all of you have a relationship that isn't just ordinary. Ann is a therapist specializing working with couples. And what she does is she really integrates a couple of approaches. Some of you who've been around the Couples Podcast a while know that I use a model called emotionally focused therapy. It's an attachment-based theory, and there's another approach out there that I respect a great deal, a little different, and she and I may debate whether or not her approach or my approach is a better one for couples, but she uses an approach called the Gottman method, and it's based on an approach that was developed by John Gottman. Truthfully, both approaches really help couples in a similar way because they're both attachment theories, and they are focused on helping couples become vulnerable and really showing their partner your heart and how important they are to you. But more importantly, Ann is someone who really is a caring therapist. As I said earlier, Ann really gives of herself because she also does something that I think really takes a commitment, which she's also a professor at Brandman University, and she teaches about relationships there. She has a podcast called the Couples Toolbox, which should be coming out in mid-September, and you could check out her podcast at her website, and she'll be giving that to us when she comes on the show. So, Ann, I want to welcome you to the podcast and thank you for coming on and sharing your heart, your expertise, and your passion for helping couples. So, Ann, welcome to the Couples Expert Podcast.
Thank you, Stuart. I'm so pleased to be here.
You know, I my introduction today talking about both of us being couples counselors and that we both work in this field. One of the things I thought I'd start with is really finding out a little bit about you and about what prompted you to go into this crazy field that we're in working with couples and counseling in general. Tell me a little bit about your path to becoming a counselor, and particularly a marriage counselor.
Oh, my goodness. It's a long, long path. It started when I was in third grade, and I was the kid who helped all of the ones who didn't have friends and couldn't figure out how to do their homework and couldn't manage on the playground. I was always the go-to person back then. So it started way back. I come from a mental health family. Dad's a psychiatrist, brother's a psychiatrist. So it's probably in my blood.
Oh, my gosh. And lots of psychiatrists in your life.
I know. And I was married to one, too. So you know what?
Oh, no.
yeah, no longer. So part of how I came here was this field has just always been a natural for me. I just moved right into it through college and graduate school and never questioned it was the right thing for me. I have been divorced, and so a lot of my interest in the field is also what I learned through that process myself and what I figured out I did wrong and my partner did wrong, and trying to figure out how to do things better next time. And I got it right this time. So I want to be able to help other people because I think for me, the magic of working with a couple in counseling as opposed to an individual is that I get to see change happen right before my eyes. Right in my office, I can see them make a turn for the better. Not always, but a lot of times. And it's just, for me, it's just so rewarding. I just love it.
You know, what's interesting about that comment, because, and I'm sure you hear this as well, some people tend to feel like, marriage counseling, oh, no, I don't want to go there. It's going to make things worse. Mm-hmm. And there's a fear, I think, in terms of marriage counseling. What is your thoughts on where that comes from?
Well, unfortunately, sometimes it can, because issues surface that have maybe been buried for a long time. So that can be the case, and that's kind of scary. I think the other thing, and I also teach marriage counseling at for a graduate psychology program, and one of the things I tell my students is that of all kinds of counseling, I think couples counseling really is very specific depending on the gender of the therapists. So, for example, if you have a female therapist and you have a male and female couple, that guy is going to come in already feeling perhaps ganged up on. So he's going to be, and counseling is much more typically a comfortable environment for women than it is for men. I think so that's a caution that I think we have to be careful about as therapists. And the other side is, I think, what happens for male therapists, or the caution for male therapists, is that a couple comes in and the woman is complaining. Typically, her husband doesn't understand, he doesn't listen to her, he doesn't appreciate her feelings. And now she has this man, counselor, who's doing all of those things she's wanting, and she's thinking, why can't my husband do what this counselor's doing? He's a guy. Why can't my husband do that? So I think that's a caution that we just need to be aware of when we're working with couples in terms of our, whether we're male, female.
Right. And for me, though, it tends, when I think about it, it tends to be on a different level, because I'm not exactly sure that I agree with you in terms of that it's, just a man sitting there, so automatically she may feel ganged up on, or that there are some of these gender issues. I think they're clearly there, and so I don't totally disagree with the concept. But for me, and I've talked about this on this podcast before, I think the reason that people tend to have this perspective that it makes it worse is because there are a bunch of therapists out there that profess to do marriage counseling that don't have any idea that it's a unique specialization that requires specialized training. that you can't just hang a shingle and say, I can do marriage counseling because I've seen individuals before. It's just two people in the room. What's the big deal? Mm-hmm. And I hear that from a lot of people, that basically what happens is they go see someone that gets caught up into the same problems that they as a couple are in.
Yes.
And before you know it, they're part of the problem now, not the solution. I think what you and I do differently, being that you're trained in the Gottman method and me with Sue Johnson in emotionally focused therapy, is that we're experts at helping people have the right dialogue.
Yes, I absolutely agree with what you said, and you said it much nicer than I might have. But I always recommend, if somebody asks me about couples counseling, only go to somebody who has specific advanced training in some method, whether it be EFT, imago therapy, Gottman method therapy. You absolutely have to have that to do couples therapy. I agree.
And the other piece of this that I think is going to go into our topic for today is the whole concept of an attachment model and mm-hmm. what that means, and an ability to really understand what are people really fighting about. And I think that's the first question I want to ask you, as someone who works a great deal with couples, and particularly in the area of conflict. When you think about couples that really are having a difficult time, one of the questions that I like to ask couples, and now you as a professional, is what do you think people really are fighting about?
Oh, that's a great question, because on one level, the number one thing that causes conflict in couples and that they fight about is nothing. On one level, it's nothing. On
Did you say level, nothing?
Nothing.
Nothing, right?
Yeah, and on another level, it's everything. And let me give you a couple of examples just from the past week. I had a couple in my office who were fighting about, and they'd been arguing about this for days before they came in, about what happened when they went to change their baby's diaper and not being unable to find the changing pad. And they were so energetic and so upset about this issue. And they were going on and on about where was the diaper pad and who was going to change the diaper and whose turn it was to change the diaper. Another couple came in and they were arguing because, and this was an argument that had been going on for 6 weeks, because the wife had gone to the store with her list for the grocery store and she forgot to bring back the cheese that was on the list. And 6 weeks later, they're still arguing about that. So, of course, it's not really about that. It's about much deeper issues. And the problem is they don't get to the deeper issues. So those arguments just get recycled over and over and over and over again.
So we have a argument that has to do with where the changing pads are, right? And another one is about forgetting to pick up something that's on the list. Mm-hmm. And the topic of conversation is, why did you do that, right?
Yes, right.
What do you see when we take those examples? And I think they're great examples, by the way. Mm-hmm. What's the real issue for them?
Well, I think one of the issues with the diaper, for example, it was triggering for the wife in this case, was that she felt her husband was accusing her of being a bad mother. She felt that underneath his upsetness about the fact that she couldn't find the diaper changing pad was that she wasn't really thinking about their child. She wasn't really focused on making sure when they were on this day trip that the child had everything it needed. And so that's what it tapped into for her. And of course, she did what many, many couples do. We're all very tempted to do this, is she got very defensive, which just meant that things escalated.
So the trigger for this couple is really the diaper changing, but the real trigger and the real issue for them was her defining him as not protecting her.
Yes,
and
exactly.
and making sure that things that she needs would be in place, and can she count on him?
Right. Yes. Can she count on him? And I think that, the sense of does my partner really have my back is underneath a lot of issues.
Really? Because when I think about it, you talked about the couple with the cheese.
Mm-hmm.
Forgetting the cheese, if you like cheese,
Yes.
must mean the interpretations become, you don't care what I need.
You don't care what I need. I'm not important. I'm not the first person on your list, what you're thinking about when you go to the store. Yeah.
So for you as the couples counselor in a situation like that, how do you go about getting them to really talk about what really matters? So not the nothing, but the something.
But the something, right. Well, the first thing, because once they're talking about this sort of, quote, nothing issue, and once they each start defending their positions, and they each start feeling under attack, and the discussion escalates, the part of their brain that has to do with emotional regulation is so triggered and firing so much that they're not really able to calmly discuss and problem solve. So the very first thing I think with almost any conflict is helping people learn how to calm themselves down. Because if you're not able to be at least a little bit calmed down when you're triggered, you can't resolve the issue. You can't get below the surface in a way that enables the two people to really talk about those deep feelings and listen to each other and understand. So the very first step, I think, in a conflict is helping them learn how to calm themselves down.
And what kind of tools or techniques do you use, or do you have any advice for those couples out there that are having a difficult time calming themselves down, how they might do it?
Well, I think in some ways it's very simple. The first step is recognizing when you're triggered. So if we think about it, we're all triggered at times. We're all agitated, we're all frustrated. But if we think about what is it, and it's usually a sign from our bodies, what is that first sign when we're starting to get really upset, when we're starting to feel agitated? Because the sooner I can recognize that first sign, the easier I can turn things around. So, for example, some very simple tools are just taking a deep breath. I had a client the other day who was telling me she was in her car, and she and her husband were talking hands-free on the phone, on their cell phones, and she was getting upset about some things he was saying that were quite critical of her. And she said, you know what, I did it differently this time. She said, I remember what we talked about in the session, and I just pulled over, I took 3 deep breaths, and then I started the conversation over, and I used an iMessage, and I said, I'm feeling upset right now. Maybe we need to talk about this later, or can you tell me again what it is that you're trying to communicate with me? So interrupting, what the 3 breaths do is they cause a little bit of an interruption between that triggered feeling that we have, that upset, agitated feeling, and what comes out of our mouth. And if we can create a little interruption, that can redirect things very, very, really very quickly. Another technique that I recommend is, and I think this is useful for everybody, to have what I call a calming phrase. And it's just a phrase when you realize you're agitated, you repeat it silently in your mind, and it's a reminder to help yourself calm down. So I have one client, for example, right now who's using the phrase, I choose to be calm in the midst of the storm. And she just repeats that silently over and over in the middle of a conflict. And what happens is it starts to calm her down. And it gives her the message that she's in control of her own emotions. And I think that's so important.
So it sounds like what you're saying is really breaking sort of the automatic responses is part of what we need to do. And I think what that also can help with, and this is sort of from my standpoint, how I try to use this is really about reminding yourself and reminding your partner that the two of you are in this together. And that if you can establish a relationship where you feel important to your partner, and that there's repeated experiences that you've had in which the two of you have been able to have an issue, something triggering you, and not only has the conflict been there, but there's been a repair. If you can sort of say, I know this is someone in my life that cares about me, and I have lots of examples of that, that would help once you can sort of break that automatic response to remind yourself to lower everything and then to just talk about it, knowing that you're talking to someone who really is there for you.
Yes, and I think that's so true, Stuart. Because sometimes in that moment we see that person as the enemy, and we forget this is my partner. This is my partner in life and my teammate, and we have to keep that in mind. And sometimes it's helpful to keep in mind an actual picture of our partner doing something that creates a loving feeling towards them. So even if I'm super angry, for example, at my husband, I get angry sometimes, but once in a while, and if I'm really angry, I'm human. I have a very clear picture in my mind, and as soon as that picture comes to my mind, it's like that anger just goes away. And the picture that I have in my mind is of my husband jumping into our swimming pool with our grandchildren and giving them dolphin rides in the pool. Because I know he doesn't like to do it. I know he doesn't like to get in cold water, but he does it anyway. And if I just put that picture in my mind, I feel loving towards him immediately.
Because my hunch is, because the only reason he's doing it is because of you.
Yes, exactly. That's the only reason.
That he gives to you in this way. So here, this person that you're so angry with is actually that same person that gives to you at other times. So it's not always, or he never. It's that something's getting in the way right now of the two of us feeling caring and loving to one another.
Exactly. I think that the other thing that sometimes is important is to recognize that our partner is, they have their hurts and they have their vulnerabilities and they have their stresses. And there are things that we do that may trigger that in them. And then they're not their best. And so we all have times that we're not our best. And, if sometimes it comes out towards our partner, but it's not really intended towards our partner. So understanding that sort of hurt, wounded person inside that we all have a little bit of can help us feel that compassion as well.
That's interesting. And you know what I was thinking as you were talking, when you talked about the image in your mind of your husband, I wonder whether you would think this is helpful. I think it might be if you actually have a physical picture, not just a memory, but something you can look at. So when you're really angry, if you have a photograph of him doing something really loving and giving, that just puts the other perspective. Because what I talk a lot about on this podcast and my practice is really about having what I call, or been calling recently, an intentional relationship.
I like that.
A relationship in which you intentionally put yourself and your thoughts into a place where you see your partner in the most positive way possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's wonderful. I like that term. And I think part of having an intentional relationship is being clear on what the goal is. We get caught up in the moment when we're upset. But if our larger goal is, for example, I really want to have a peaceful, harmonious atmosphere in my home for my children to grow up in. If I'm clear on that, that helps me define my behaviors very quickly.
Especially if the two of you develop those kinds of goals together.
Yes, yes, yes.
In terms of conflict and the whole concept of repair as opposed to, what is your philosophy between when a couple is looking at their relationship and saying, okay, how are we doing? Or how do I measure how much of a problem we have? Or how do I measure whether or not going in to see a counselor would be helpful to make it even better? Do you look at it based on the conflicts that go on, or do you base it based on whether or not there's repair?
Yeah, definitely the repair is the important piece. And in fact, John Gottman found in his research, and he researched over decades, longitudinal studies, that the couples that were the most successful, that stayed together and had the highest degree of satisfaction, were those couples who were good at repairing when their relationship got off track, when they were in conflict, in other words, the ability to repair. Not whether or not they had conflict or how much they had it, but whether they could repair when they were in the middle of a conflict. That was the number one predictor of a good relationship. So that's huge.
So if we take that in mind, how would you define repair?
I think repair during conflict has to do with some of the things we just talked about, and that is the ability to self-soothe, to recognize when you're agitated or triggered, to keep in mind the larger goal, to keep in mind that your partner is doing their best in the moment, and that maybe they're being triggered about something. So I think all of that is part of repair. That's the part that goes on internally inside ourselves. But I think there are also behaviors that can occur between the couple. And part of that is recognizing what's important to your partner. So, for example, one of the things I know about my husband that's really important is touch. And I know that if I reach out and touch him in a loving way when we're in conflict, that is something that can help calm him down. And I want to give you an example of that. And this was a repair that I did recently. Didn't say one single word, but it worked magically. We were in a kind of a heated discussion. We're sitting across from each other in two love seats in our living room. And I could feel that the energy was escalating. And I knew this was not going to get anywhere good. So he was talking, and I wasn't saying anything. I was saying my calming phrase in my mind, trying to get myself calmed down because I was feeling pretty upset. And then I stood up. I walked over to the love seat where he was sitting. I sat down next to him, and he's still talking, but he kind of looks over at me, and he's still talking. I don't say a word. And I scooted my body right next to his, and then I turned, and I put my legs, both of my legs, on his lap. And that's all I did. And he looked at me, and he looked away, and he looked at me again, and he just stopped talking. And then I reached out, and I kissed him on the cheek, and it was over. What we were fighting about was completely finished. We were able later on, when we were both calm, to bring up the parts of that we needed to discuss, but the tension was gone. And so, and that came because I knew that is powerful for him, that touch from me in a loving way. So that's one example.
It's a beautiful example, as a matter of fact, Anne. I think that that really demonstrates an ability in the example that you gave of you rising above the current situation and saying what matters here more than winning an argument, being correct in the argument, proving a point, is how we feel about each other.
Yes. And
that if you make the most important thing is the relationship and not the particular situation. Mm-hmm. And that's really what you did. You were able to say, I know right now that we, as a couple, need to have some form of a connection here that we don't feel right now. And by you putting your legs on him, reminded him that he matters to you.
Yes. Yes.
And there's nothing that defines love more than what you did.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And what I know is that both of you benefited from that.
Oh, yes. Because then later on, we were able to talk about what we needed to talk about. I think another strategy for repair in the middle of a conflict is to also recognize and verbalize, acknowledge what your commonalities are. So, for example, a couple I was working with recently, they were in an ongoing long-term conflict of some very stressful situations in their lives, and they had very different views on how it should be handled. And it would quickly escalate when they tried to talk about it. And so one of the things we've started to focus on is really getting clear on what their mutual goal was. So their mutual goal, and they could both acknowledge it, was to be finished with this project. And their other mutual goal was to maintain a good connection with each other. So once they could start to verbalize that and say, yeah, we both want to get finished with this. We both want to get to the other side of it. And what they actually ended up agreeing, which was a wonderful negotiation, was one of them said, how about if I handle it my way for the next 2 weeks, and then we'll see, and if that has not been successful, then you take over and you handle it your way. And so they were actually able to negotiate that and work with each other, again, like you said before, Stuart, which is helping couples learn that they're a team and working together towards a common goal. So the more they can see that and recognize that the end result is they want is the same. They just have different ways of getting there.
Right. And then the other thing that does is, because what we know as marriage counselors, that there are cycles that couples get into, and that the cycles become a really powerful force against the couple's connection. And that if you can, I mean, we just finished the Olympics. The relay races is the best example of this, is unless those people work together, they won't lose. And the reason the teams won that they did is because they were real good teammates. And if you're not working together with your partner, and instead most couples tend to pull each other apart, you're going to lose the battle. And let me say that differently. You're going to lose the war, and the war is about closeness. The battle is the trigger and your cycle. And if you want to beat your cycle, work as a couple.
Yes,
and it's really a beautiful thing to see couples who start out as almost adversaries and become a joint unit working for a common goal of closeness and connection. And that's what you do so well with the couples that you work with. So, and I want to thank you for just sharing some of these expertise and what I really have found valuable today. And some guests that come on this show do this, some don't do it as effectively, but you give very specific tools about what someone can do. And I want to, before we end, to let you talk a little bit about your podcast that's coming up. And I'm excited for you because I know my podcast here has grown tremendously over the last year or so with a community of listeners that listen on a regular basis. And it's such a rewarding experience that you soon will have as well. Tell my listeners a bit about your podcast and what it's called and a little bit about what it's like.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to do that, and thank you for being an inspiration. You are one of the people who inspires me, though you probably didn't realize that.
Oh, thank you.
My podcast is called The Couples Toolbox, and it will be launching in mid-September. I'm finishing up the details right now, so I'm really excited about that. Listeners can find out more information on my website, which is www.annegoshen, my name, ANNEGOSHEN.com. And I'll be posting the launch date on that, and all of the episodes will be posted on there. So that's a real good place to find out more about it. So I'm really excited about being on the other side of the
the
podcast.
other side. That sounds scary.
I'll be interviewing you.
That sounds scary. Like the other side. Oh my God.
Yes, I know.
But actually, it's fun to be on both sides. So you're going to really find, I think, a common audience for yourself. And one of the things when you were talking, I want to just remind my listeners as well, as they know that I do show notes. So if you want to find out, if you don't have to, if you're listening to this in your car or something, don't start taking out pencils and getting into any kind of accident. I will have it on the show notes, and when you pull up my show notes, there'll be a link to Anne's website as well as some information on her. And the other thing I wanted to make sure everyone knows is that you've been really gracious, both of your time, but you also given us a PDF that we're going to give away to the audience, or not give away, that we're going to give to the audience as a gift that you've given to the Couples Expert. Talk a little bit about what this your gift is.
Well, I've given two things actually that I think are going to be made available. One is a video of a talk that I gave on the what I call the 7 essential ingredients for successful relationships, and a really overview in there some of the work of Dr. John Gottman and what he calls the Sound Relationship House, which of course includes part of that is how to manage conflict. And then the PDF is actually a PDF of that Sound Relationship House, because it gives, as I said, 7 essential parts. And it's a really good way to kind of assess, how am I doing? How are we doing on each one of these? Managing conflict, turning towards each other rather than away, creating shared meaning together. So those are just some of the highlights on that. So I hope that that's going to be useful to your listeners.
Well, again, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving of this gift. And thank all of you for coming again on this podcast to listen to this mission of mine, which is really helping couples. And one of the things before I end, I want to remind everyone is that I am continuing to do, which I love doing, my daily 3 Minutes with Stuart on my YouTube channel, as well as remind everyone that I am taking reservations for my next 2 Days and 7 Conversations workshop, which will be on September 10th and 11th. And you can get all the information on my website, which is www.thecouplesexpertscottsdale.com. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you all next time, and stay connected. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode with your host, Stuart Fensterheim. You're one step closer to reigniting that fiery passion with your partner. For more information
and your 30-minute free phone consultation with Stuart,
visit www.thecouplesexpertscottsdale.com. We'll see you next time.